Wow, I love that song. Never failed us yet. Never will. We're in a series called Voices from the Crowd, and we're listening to people as they speak to us from the pages of God's Word. I remember growing up as a kid, going to an amusement park, especially going to Disney World and other places, and they always had these signs. They were like goofy characters, but they always had them at the beginning of the line, and they would have like an arm out or holding something out, and it would have something like, "You must be this high in order to ride this ride." You remember seeing those kind of deals? And I used to get so disappointed because I'd be so eager to ride something. I'd get up there, and it was like, I'd be standing on my toes or looking for something. And then as I got older and grew past that, there were a lot of rides that people wanted to go on. When I got up there, I wished I could have shrunk and go, I can't ride that roller coaster. I'm not tall enough. But they were limits. They were like, you had to be a certain height before you could ride this ride. I read an interesting deal out of the Akron Beacon Journal newspaper. There was an ad for a film company in there, and it said, "Stock up and save, limit one per customer." And I'm like, okay, stock up, and they limit you to one roll of film. Just something didn't make sense. So, we're used to limits. We're used to people putting limits on things in our life. Sometimes we put limits on ourselves, and this is a true story. I thought it was so interesting. Renaud III, he was the 14th century duke in what's now called Belgium. He was grossly overweight, and Renaud's older brother Edward revolted against Renaud's rule. Edward captured Renaud, but he didn't kill him. Instead, he built a room. Now, catch the wording of this. He built a room around Renaud in the castle and promised that he could regain his life and his property when he left the room. This wouldn't have been difficult for most people, since the room had several windows and several doors that were normal size, none of which were locked and none of which had bars on them. The problem was Renaud's size. To regain his freedom, he needed to lose weight to be able to go through the door or to go through a window. Edward knew his brother, and each day he provided a variety of delicious foods in the room for Renaud to eat. And instead of dieting his way out of prison, Renaud grew fatter. When Duke Edward was accused of cruelty, he had a ready answer for it, and he said, "My brother's not a prisoner. He may leave when he so wills." Renaud stayed in that room for 10 years, and he wasn't released until Edward died in battle. And then once he was released, his health was so bad that Renaud died within a year after being released from prison or from the room, and he died a prisoner of his own appetite. Self-imposed limits in our life. We're used to limits, and we're accustomed to them. But the Scripture talks about this, and here's the Scriptures we've been using. In Hebrews chapter 11, he says this: faith means being sure of the things we hope for and knowing that something is real, even though we don't see it. Faith is the reason we remember great people, and these are the ones we're talking about, who lived in times past. And then he says this: God's pleased with these people. God's pleased with all of them because of their faith. And then we go over a continuation into chapter 12. He said, therefore, since we're surrounded by such a huge crowd of witnesses, these people who lived out their life, they lived out their faith, they defied the odds, they did incredible things. He said, since we're surrounded by this huge crowd of witnesses to the life of faith, let us strip off every weight that slows us down, especially the sins that so easily trip us up. He tells us that's what he wants us to do, is to strip off and to learn from these people. And he said, then run with endurance the race God has set before each of us. Limits. It brings us to someone in this crowd I want to talk about this morning, that he's talking about this crowd of witnesses. And this is somebody who is familiar with limitations. He's familiar with lids on his life. He was the youngest of all of his siblings. He was a shepherd. He was a poet. He was a musician. He was a great king. He made the Hall of Faith list that we're talking about in Hebrews 11. He was a great warrior. He achieved great success in his life. Now, when we think of him, we don't immediately think of limitations on this guy's life. Yet, there were many who never saw his potential. never saw what he was capable of doing. He was the youngest in the family. He didn't receive a lot of affirmation from his parents or his siblings. As a young man, he didn't look like a warrior. He didn't look like a king, but he always seemed to rise to the occasion. He always seemed to be able to rise to the challenge. So as we're running our lap around this arena of life and we're running our faith and we look up in the stands and suddenly we see this guy making his way down the stands and he gets on the track with us. And as we're running along, this guy comes running up beside us on the track, and suddenly we realize that, man, this is David. This is King David. This is David, the man. And as we're running, we're thinking, okay, now what is he going to share with us? And we're thinking, okay, he's probably going to talk about the time he killed a bear and a lion with his bare hands. Or maybe he's going to talk about the time he picked up the stones and he faced Goliath and he threw the stone, hit him between the eyes and killed the giant. Maybe he's going to talk about some of these great things that he's done about becoming king of Israel and telling us all about what it was like to be the king. So as we're running along with him, we're just waiting for his first words. We're waiting for him to say something to us. And suddenly, he looks over at us as we're going around the track, and he says this: don't let your limitations become lids that keep you from accomplishing what God wants to do through you. Don't let your limitations become lids that keep you from accomplishing what God wants to do through you. In other words, he was basically saying this: you can overcome the limitations that others put on you. David's greatest battles in his early years, it wasn't battling a lion or a bear with his bare hands. His greatest obstacles, his greatest battles came from the people who tried to put limits or lids on David's life. For example, he had all these people in his life. His father, Jesse, he didn't think David had king potential in his life. Maybe you have someone in your family that feels like that they don't believe in you. They don't feel like you have potential. Well, this was David. Jesse, his dad, his father, became very excited one day when he learned that the prophet Samuel said that, hey, I'm going to pick a new king for Israel, and he's going to come out of Jesse's household. He's going to be one of Jesse's sons. So Jesse's all excited, and he's the prophet Samuel's coming to his house the next day, and he's going to anoint a new king for Israel. So Jesse's laying in bed at night, and he's talking to his wife, and they're just talking out loud. He's going, I bet it's going to be Elam. I bet it's going to be, one of the older ones, and they're just going through their head of which one of their sons is going to be king. So the next day, the prophet shows up, and Jesse gets all of his sons out, and he lines them up, 7 of them. The prophet gets there, and the prophet starts looking at them, and Jesse's feeling pretty good because he thinks, man, I got some good king potential right here in my sons. And the prophet goes down the line looking at them. Every son is there except David. Jesse didn't think about calling the youngest, David, because David was out in the field watching sheep. But he had all the other sons there for the prophet. And as the prophet's going down the line, at first the prophet Samuel thought the way Jesse was thinking, and he's looking at him, and he gets to the first one, and he goes, man, this looks like king material to me. This must be the one. And the scripture says it like this. It said, when they arrived, Samuel saw Elam, and he thought, surely the Lord's anointed stands before the Lord. But the Lord said to Samuel, don't consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him. The Lord does not look at things that man looks at. Man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. Jesse paraded 7 sons in front of Samuel, and God didn't choose any of them because God wanted David. He wanted the one who had heart. Isn't it reassuring to know that God doesn't see us and value us on what we look like on the outside, but he knows us as we truly are? And he said, I'm waiting on David. David is the one, and the story goes, Samuel anoints David as the king. So his father didn't even see the potential in David. The next one, his brothers didn't think he had warrior potential. Fast forward in the story a little bit. Israel's at war with the Philistines. 3 of David's older brothers are in the army, and they're all at the battlefront. And it's a really interesting story because there was a valley. There were 2 hillsides in a valley, and the Israelites were over here, the Philistines were over here, and they were ready to do battle, but they thought, why should we all die? Let's just pick a champion from each army and let them go down in the valley and fight it out. Winner takes all. So the Philistines had Goliath, 9-foot 9 inches is what historians tell us. 9 foot 9 inches tall, this giant standing in the valley, almost as big as Kyle. He's standing in the valley, and he's defying the people of it. He's going, send me somebody down here to fight me. And it is really kind of comical if you read the story, because it said every morning the armies would get up, they'd get out of their tents, they'd get dressed, they'd get their armor on, they would go to the edge of the hillside, and they would stand there and yell at each other, and Goliath would go down there and he'd make his challenge, send me somebody to fight me, and all this. And they did this every day. They did it in the morning, they'd go back in the afternoon, and after they did their yelling and screaming, it said that the Israelites returned to their tents shaking in fear. They were scared. Nobody wanted to go down and battle this dude in the valley. So David leaves home one day. His father sends him to the battlefront. He said, go check on your brothers. Go give me a battle report, a war report of what's going on with your brothers. So David goes to meet his brothers, and as he's in the camp, he hears this challenge going on, and he's like, what's up with this? This guy's down here talking about God, and he's defying God, and he's defying his people, and he's asking around, is anybody going to fight him? Why don't you guys go down there and fight this guy? We stand with the Lord, and he'll give us the victory, and he's just going around the camp asking questions and wondering why no one is going to fight this giant. And this is what the scripture said. When Eliab, David's oldest brother, heard him speaking with the men, he burned with anger at him and asked, why have you come down here? And with whom did you have those few sheep in the desert? In other words, that was a pretty low blow to David. He's like, David, why are you here? This is for men. This is for soldiers. We're in the army. Why aren't you out there taking care of your little lambs, David? He goes on. He said, I know how conceited you are and how wicked your heart is. You came down only to watch the battle. His brothers saw him as nothing more than an errand boy for daddy, not as a warrior. They didn't see warrior potential. The next one, King Saul, he didn't think David had champion potential. When Saul heard there was someone in the camp who said, I'm willing to go down in the valley and fight the giant, Saul sent for him. He asked for him to come. He said, come. And I'm thinking Saul's probably sitting there thinking, okay, this is probably going to be a seasoned, weathered veteran of the army. It's going to be a lifetimer in the army. It's going to be one of my grit and, kind of guys, and he's going to come in, yeah, I'll go take on. So Saul's probably got this picture in his head of some great warrior walking in saying, hey, I'll take on Goliath. Instead, in walks a shepherd boy. Talk about a letdown. In walks this little shepherd boy, and then he says this. When he walks in, David says, let no man's heart fail him because of fear. He said, I'll go, I, your servant, will go and fight this Philistine. And I think if we kind of condense that statement, he would probably just walked in and said, have no fear, David's here. I'll fight the giant for you. And as he says this, we read Saul's response. He said, you're not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are a youth, and he is a man of war from his youth. Talk about cutting. He said, you're just a kid, and you're going to fight a man's battle. Well, my question is, why isn't a man fighting the battle then? God uses a youth. He uses a kid, and he says, why are you here? He said, I'm here to fight the giant. And then to make up for what Saul perceived as David's shortcomings of being a kid with no experience, then Saul tries to make up for it and give David his armor. Now, I've always wondered why Saul wanted to give David his armor. Why didn't he say, well, go get one of the men's armors and wear? Why did he give him his armor? Well, first of all, because Saul didn't have any plans of using it. It didn't seem like. He wasn't going to go into battle. But he gives the armor, and Saul is this tall warrior. And he's tall, he's big, he's a mature warrior, and he's given this to a kid to wear. So naturally it's clanky, it's oversized, it's draping off of him. David didn't allow Saul to hinder him with his low expectations and his bulky armor. So often, hear this, so often we allow others' expectations of us to set our limits, don't we? Well, this is what I see for you. Here, this is what I think you should have. And we let other people set the expectations for us and limit what we do. I love the scripture I've referred to a lot over life. It says, as a man thinks in his heart, so he becomes. As he thinks in his heart, so he becomes. He went out to face Goliath just like he was. And then there was someone else who didn't believe in him, and Goliath didn't think David had opponent potential. He's out there waiting for this warrior to come face him in battle, and they send a shepherd kid out across the valley. That was the final insult for Goliath when he sees David walking out against him in battle. And the giant took one look at David, and he probably started laughing, and he made this statement. He said, am I a dog that you would come at me with sticks? And the Philistines cursed David by his gods. And then he says this, he says, come here, I'll give you your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. You can easily determine the caliber of a person's amount of determination by the opposition that it takes to discourage them. You can tell a lot about a person when they're facing opposition, and tell a lot about their character and what it takes to discourage that person. In fact, the Bible tells us this in Proverbs. He said, the wicked flee when no one's chasing them, but the godly are as bold as lions. Everyone told David, you have no potential. His family told him, you have no potential. His king told him, he said, you have no potential. Even Goliath, his enemies, said, you have no skill, you have no potential. But faith makes us bigger, stronger, and more courageous than we could ever be on our own. And that's what happened with David. When he was confronted with a Goliath-sized problem, he relied on faith and trust in his God. Because you see, when we face Goliath-sized problems, we'll do one of two things. Fear says he's too big to hit. And faith says he's too big to miss. But we'll respond one way or another. So we're running this lap with David, and we're listening to him talk about people who believe that he has potential and where they set limits and lids on his life, and we're making the final turn of the lap to go back to the home stand. And David says, got just a few more parting words for you. And the first is this: limitations don't limit us unless we let them. Limitations won't limit us unless we let them. His father, his brothers, all the leaders, they all thought David had no potential, while in reality, he had the greatest potential of all, and that was God potential. He had God potential. He had God's strength, God's power, God's resources. And from the day Samuel anointed him, David realized God could strengthen him to rise above the limitations that other people would try to place on him. Now, let me just stop here for a moment and say this. So many people never succeed because someone, maybe a parent, maybe a spouse, maybe a child, maybe a teacher, maybe a coach, maybe a boss, maybe a friend. Some people never succeed because someone told them they couldn't. Someone said to them, you can't do that. They said, because you're not educated. Or they said, because you don't have any skill. They said, because you're not from the right pedigree. They said, because you're divorced. Or because you're a single parent. They said, because you have a bad past and you did some pretty bad things in your past. They said, you can't succeed because you don't know the right people or you don't have the right resources. And the problem is we've listened to the wrong they and allowed them to put a lid on our life. We've listened to the wrong crowd. We've listened to the wrong voice. We've listened to the wrong they, and we've allowed them to put a lid on our life. But listen, God, you have God potential in your life. God gave you that. God put that within you. He gave you God potential, and He wants you to know what Philippians 4:13 says. He says that you can do everything through God who gives you the strength. That's God potential, and that's what's in each person in this room. We have God potential. So David says, don't let others limit you. And then the second thing he says is, don't try to be someone else when others impose limitations on you. You ever heard the statement, this was popular back in the 80s and 90s and the Jesus movement, and they would say things like that. They come up to you and they'd say, God loves you and God has a wonderful plan for your life. That's great. Oh, yeah, wonderful. I love that. And it's true. It's very accurate. But something else I also discovered is that people love you and people have an agenda for your life too. How many know that? Oh, yeah, we love you, but here's what you need to do. And here's what we want to see you do. Here's how we want to see you act. Here's how we want to see you function. People have an agenda. People have a plan for our lives. And some people are so busy living other people's agendas in their life, they never really live the life they were intended to live. When Saul realized David was going to fight Goliath, he tried to put his armor on him. He wanted him to fight and attack the problem the way that he would have attacked the problem. Or perhaps he gave him his armor and thought, well, maybe people will think that's me down there with the armor on and the king's fighting. I don't know what his reasoning was, but David realized that God didn't want to substitute Saul. He didn't want to stand in for Saul. That God wanted David. He wanted to do it through him. God will never hold us accountable for the gifts that we don't have and responsibilities that He hasn't given us. He wants us to be ourselves. Use the unique gifts that God has given you. I heard this statement, it stuck with me over the years, but it said, every single one of us, every person in this room, we're all born originals. And most of us die copies. We're all born originals. But most of us, because of the pressure and the expectations of others and the limits that people put on us, we conform and we try to be like someone else. And we often die copies. He goes on, he says, when you rise above your limitations, you can help others do the same. I call these people lid lifters. People who can lift the lids on other people's lives. The day David faced Goliath, that was probably the only thing on his mind. He was probably thinking, I'm just tired of listening to this guy. I'm going to take care of him. I'm going to end this defiance of God. And he was so focused on the battle and on killing Goliath, and he probably never realized that this victory would become Israel's victory. That the moment Goliath fell, that was the moment that the Israelites rose up and the lids came off their life. Every day they walked to the edge of this hill, and they would walk to the edge of the hill and they'd scream and they would shout at each other, and then they would put this lid back on their head and walk back to their tent in fear. So the day that David stood up to Goliath and he said, I don't have a lid because I've got God potential and I can do all things through Him. And the day that David stood up and he said, I'll go face the giant, when he slayed the giant, suddenly the lids came off of the rest of the army, and they were like, yeah, we can do this too. We have God potential too. Their fear and intimidation, it was replaced with courage and aggressiveness. The day that David realized that people will follow the example of a leader. The moment that he accomplished more than he thought was possible, so did the people of Israel. And the day that you and I face our limitations and we rise above them, that could be the day that your spouse or that your kids or that your coworker or that your boss or that employee you work with or your classmate or your teammate, that could be the day that their lids come off as well. The moment we rise above our limitations, we'll actually inspire others to rise above their limitations. So we finished our lap with David, and he's slowing down, and he turns and he's starting to walk back up into the crowd of witnesses. And suddenly David turns around and he looks at it and he says, oh yeah, one last thing. That if you're going to go to the next level, if you're going to rise above your lids and your limitations, he said, it's always going to require faith and courage. Faith and courage. This is something that was in David's life. He faced a bear and a lion while he was watching sheep, took them on single-handedly and killed them. He was facing an unsupportive father and brothers, yet he defied their limitations on his life He was anointed as king when nobody thought he was king material. He faced a giant that was way bigger than him and more experienced than him. He was running for his life at one point from the King Saul and trying to hide out from him. It took faith and courage. And then he had a colossal failure, an affair. And he committed murder, and his life looked like it was falling apart. But it took faith and courage for him to rise above that failure in his life. It will always take faith and courage to rise above your lid or your limitations. I'm convinced that each of us face challenges that prepare us for the next step. And almost every week I hear stories from people right here who have said, I faced this challenge. Maybe it was a physical or a spiritual challenge or a financial challenge or a relational challenge or some type of challenge. And I hear these stories, and that the people say, when I responded with faith and courage, the lid was lifted and I went to the next level. I grew. Something happened inside of me. So whatever the situation you're facing this morning, don't let your limitations become lids that keep you from allowing God to accomplish what He wants to do in and through you. Realize you have an opportunity to rise above the limitations that have been placed on you by simply having courage to take the next step in your journey and by placing your faith and your trust in Him. I love this scripture, one of my favorite, Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Trust God from the bottom of your heart and don't try to figure out everything on your own. Listen for God's voice in everything you do, everywhere that you go. He's the one who will keep you on track. So what are the lids in your life today? Maybe you have a lid of inadequacy. You're feeling like, well, I'm just not adequate. I just don't have what it takes. I'm not skilled. I'm not educated in this area. And you've let inadequacy keep a lid on your life. Maybe you have let your age keep a lid on your life. You say, I'm a student, I'm young. I mean, what can I do? And you've let an age limit put a lid on your life. Or maybe you're a senior citizen here today and you go, I've lived my life, I've done that, I'm on in the golden years now, and what could God possibly do in me or through me now? And you've put a lid on your life. Maybe your past has put a lid on your life and you go, I did some things in my past and they still come back to haunt me and I still can't get rid of those memories. And I'm just letting the past put a lid on what God can do in my life in the present. Maybe it's just fear. Maybe you're afraid and you're going, I don't know what's around the next turn. And that just keeps a lid on your life from really doing what you feel God wants you to do. Maybe some of you've been told God could never use you. You'll never amount to anything. You're not qualified. You're too old. You're too young. You've made too many mistakes. Your marriage will never be restored. Trust can never be restored. You've been hurt too much. Maybe you've had an addiction and you just can't break that addiction and it's become a lid in your life. And you say, well, I'm just too weak. I can't overcome. Maybe you've never lived the Christian life. You're like, I could never live this kind of life you're talking about. I could never live a life of total surrender and faith to Christ. And it's just too much and I don't think I could ever do that. And that's become a lid in your life. Your life is a wreck and your past is bad and you think, God could never use me. I could never rise above where I've been in my life. That set a lid over me. Listen, through faith and through courage, you can break the limitations that you or possibly others have placed on your life. And God can and will do great things in and through you. Don't let your limitations become lids that keep you from accomplishing what God wants to do in and through you.